The relentless rise in COVID infections translating into record-breaking numbers. Those numbers are people lying desperately ill in hospital beds, and then those who don't make it. For days now, we've seen ambulances queuing outside hospitals across the capital, but the pressure is being felt far outside London. We witnessed it ourselves in Milton Keynes yesterday. More than 30,000 patients with COVID are in UK hospitals today. This is higher than at any point in the pandemic.
Both the respiratory wards and the intensive care units are almost surreal, I guess. They are incredibly full. They are full of patients who are incredibly sick, and there are almost no staff. I would say that in my experience, and experience of our communities, the respiratory, the intensive care communities and the NHS, this is something we've never, ever experienced. And we're really walking into the unknown, which makes all of us very, very nervous.
The UK has consistently been high up the league table of infections and deaths, but equally it is ahead of most of the rest of the world on vaccinating against the virus. On Monday, we were told by the Prime Minister himself that more than 1.3 million people have so far received the jab. Tomorrow the figure will be updated, and from next week we will have a daily tally. There are many questions, though, over the supply. Promises of 2 million a week are currently far off the mark. But why? This was the Prime Minister on Monday.
It's not so much a manufacturing issue, though that is part of it. It's also that each batch needs to be properly approved and quality controlled.
And this was the explanation today.
The current rate limiting factor on the vaccine rollout is the supply of approved, tested, safe vaccine. And we are working with both AstraZeneca and Pfizer to increase that supply as fast as possible, and they're doing a brilliant job.
While Labour upped the ante with calls for 6 million doses a week.
In the past, ministers have told us that they had agreements for 30 million AstraZeneca doses by September 2020 and 10 million of Pfizer doses by the end of 2020. So I think people just want to understand the figures and want clarity.
It was announced today that 7 mass vaccination centres will open next week, with sites in London, Newcastle, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Surrey and Stevenage, with a further 3 sites in the car parks of the supermarket Morrison's from Monday. And with those vaccinations comes hope, but not before some grim weeks ahead.
Well, MPs are voting right now on whether to approve England's new lockdown laws. They are likely to give overwhelming backing to the restrictions. Some Conservative MPs are alarmed that the regulations apply until the end of March. But Boris Johnson told them that he expected a gradual relaxation before then. The emergency common session also heard that this summer's A-levels and GCSEs in England would be replaced by teacher assessments. And the Education Secretary said that parents could complain to the school's regulator if their children didn't get enough online learning. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, now reports.
Relax the restrictions.
Only one voice in this locked-down South London classroom. The Prime Minister telling a specially recalled House of Commons that the lockdown laws debated this afternoon will not be swept away in mid-February, even if the top target groups for vaccination have had their jabs by then.
Although we should remain extremely cautious about the timetable ahead. And as was the case last spring, our emergence from the lockdown cocoon will not be a big bang, Mr. Speaker, but a gradual unwrapping.
This is mandatory for all state.
Later, the Education Secretary's words echoed through the classroom, heard by a few students, some who'd expected to sit GCSE exams this year. Now hearing Gavin Williamson confirm the exams are cancelled.
I can confirm now that I wish to use a form of teacher-assessed grades with training and support provided to ensure these are awarded fairly and consistently across the country.
In exams, because I feel like that's what I've been preparing for most, and now everything is going to be somewhat like coursework, so it's a big change.
I felt kind of torn because I'm happy that I don't have to do the exams because I feel kind of stressed about it. But then again, I'm not sure how the teachers are going to be able to get their exams, get the results.
Okay, Year 11, can you just, as I share this presentation on the screen...
In Manchester, an online lesson gets underway. The Education Secretary said pupils should get 3 to 5 hours of remote quality teaching each school day. And if parents didn't think they were getting that, they could complain to the school, and if that didn't work, to Ofsted.
We are doing our absolute best with the technology we've got, with the workforce we've got, with the IT we've got. We're doing our absolute best to produce and provide high quality work for the students. And the thought at which that, a parent could be slightly disappointed with what we're doing and take that to Ofsted just seems to be a step too far.
Gavin Williamson said schools in lockdown should now take in not just vulnerable children and the children of essential workers, but also children who don't have space at home to work properly or don't have access to laptops.
During the first lockdown, most of the children were children of key workers. This time around, we've got an awful lot more vulnerable students who we've either asked to come in or have been directed to come in by social workers or whatever, or parents have contacted us and said due to sort of the mental health concerns they have, they really, really need the routine of school. But, it's limited as to how many children that we can have in school. So it's a balancing act all the time between wanting to provide them with that routine and the safety net that they see school as, and not having too many students in school.
Manchester city centre in lockdown. Tory critics of the policy wanted a promise from the Prime Minister that schools and businesses would see a change in policy by mid-February, when vaccinations of the priority groups could be completed.
Can my right honourable friend reassure me that come mid-February there will be a presumption rather than a prospect of an easing of restrictions? My constituents would like there to be a presumption, especially when it comes to schools.
Prime Minister.
Yes, I think I share her constituents' instincts. Perhaps a cautious presumption is what I would advise them to make.
Even within a household, you can't play tennis or golf. Notwithstanding the assault on liberty and livelihoods, why are these regulations pervaded by a pettifogging malice?
Prime Minister.
Pettifogging, yes. Malicious, no. I know that my right honourable friends and colleagues, honourable right honourable members, will find all sorts of reasons to oppose all sorts of restrictions, but in the end, Mr. Speaker, we have to look at the overall budget of risk caused by transmission between members of the human race, and that is what we're trying to restrict.
Outside, a small protest by lockdown opponents. Inside Parliament, a tiny rebellion expected. Boris Johnson told his MPs, all now hinged on the vaccination rollout, now engaged in a sprint race to beat the new COVID variant.
And some breaking news. Within the last few minutes, MPs approved the latest restrictions aimed at combating COVID-19 in England. It was 524 votes in favour and 60 against. Now, Northern Ireland's Education Minister also announced today that all its GCSE, AS and A-level exams will not go ahead this year. Wales and Scotland had already announced the cancellation of their summer exams. Now, given the litany of news today, most of our hopes are now resting well and firmly on the mass rollout of those vaccines. Well, earlier I spoke to the Minister for COVID vaccine deployment, Nadeem Zahawi, and began by asking him about the shocking figures today with more than 1,000 deaths.
It's a wake-up call in many ways to why it's so important that we observe the rules, hands, face, space, that we observe the much stricter lockdown that we now have in place to try and bring this new variant under control, whilst at the same time rolling out the largest vaccination program in the history of this country.
Right, but it's also a wake-up call, is it not, for the vaccine program to be rolled out as fast as possible and according to the plan. And as far as we can tell, the number of vaccines rolled out so far is below the number that we were promised. Why the shortfall? If I look at what the government has been saying in recent days, we've got a number of reasons here. One was the lack of vials. Then there was a thing called fill and finish. Then there was, blaming it on the regulators, then blaming it on the manufacturers. I mean, every day there seems to be a different excuse or reason why we haven't got up to the numbers that we were promised. And to the public, that sounds a bit confusing. So can you just clarify what the actual reason is why we aren't there where we should be?
So absolutely, there is no lack of vials. There is a process. It's a complex manufacturing process. And at the beginning of any manufacturing process in vaccines, you will get that sort of early, less stable ability to manufacture. That is improving. Of course, there is the sterility time and then the batch testing that you have to take into account. But very quickly, in the next few weeks, you will see absolutely stabilizing batches coming through. So greater stability in the production and the delivery. So the supply chain becomes much more stable. And the NHS has got a deployment plan to deploy all the vaccines that we have on order and that will come tens of millions in the next weeks and months.
Okay, there's a lot of stuff to get through. You've withheld 50% of the Pfizer vaccines. Is that because you're still planning to use those 50% as a second dose for those who've received their first dose, or have you given up on the second dose?
Not at all. Everyone who receives a Pfizer first dose will receive a Pfizer second dose.
But not after 21 days?
No, the difference is, which allows us to vaccinate more people more quickly, as the 4 chief medical officers of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland all agree, as does the regulator, as does the Joint Committee on Vaccination, that that's the right thing to do to extend the period for Pfizer from 3 weeks to up to 12 weeks, for AstraZeneca from 4 weeks between doses to up to 12 weeks. That has allowed us to release more of that Pfizer vaccine that we had, so that you'll see an uplift in numbers this week and next week, as well as AstraZeneca coming online.
Okay, the World Health Organization, again, is not entirely happy with the delay of that second dose. You know, they've reserved judgment on that. Does that concern you at all?
So Pfizer themselves have said that it is up to the national regulator of each nation that have ordered the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. I'm going to quote Jonathan Van Tam, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of England, who reminded the nation that for every 250 additional vulnerable people that we vaccinate, we save a life. So the more we do quickly, the better it is.
Now, with the closure of schools, another group that wants to be vaccinated early are teachers. This would be one way of getting the schools to open earlier. Again, is that part of your planning at the moment, and how feasible is it?
So at the moment, our plan is very clear that we follow the guidance from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization and vaccinate the most vulnerable, because if we get through those 9 categories, that is 99% of deaths from COVID.
But there are also many members of your own party who are going to vote in the House of Commons today who want the economy to be unlocked sooner rather than later. And schools are an important part of that. So is there a fundamental problem here with the way that the priority lists are drawn up? That, you know, the only way you can really open schools is if you vaccinate teachers, you know, before perhaps some of the other vulnerable groups who could be asked to be shielding a little bit longer.
Once we get through categories 1 to 4, by mid-February, we should be making a huge dent, a huge difference in the hospitalization rate and, of course, the mortality, the deaths from COVID.
And finally, and very briefly, if you don't mind, we've been promised 2 million vaccines a week by Matt Hancock. When will that week arrive? When will that be?
So my focus and my target that have been set to me by the Prime Minister is to deliver the vaccines to the first 4 categories. That will, and you'll know the number, it's sort of 13.9 million cohort where we will offer them the vaccine by mid-February. You will see on a weekly basis, I promise you that, because it will start next week, how many we're vaccinating. You will see the uplift this week from the previous 3 weeks, and then you'll be able, the whole nation, your viewers will be able to judge as if whether we're going to hit that number. I'm confident the NHS has a plan and the infrastructure to deploy and deliver for those 4 cohorts by mid-February, and I'm confident we'll meet that target.
Okay, Nadeem Zahawi, thank you very much.
My pleasure.